Well, hello everyone, it's Rose, and I'm back with chapter 11 of the Magnate's Manifesto by Jennifer Hayward. For those of you who are just new to this series, you can find previous chapters in the playlist that I've linked in the little eye at the top right-hand corner of your screen. You can also find playlists for all of the books that I'm reading down in the description to this video, and I'll also be listing there the future books that I'll be reading. I will also be including at the end of this video the link to this playlist so that you'll be able to find the next chapter if you are coming to this after I've posted future chapters. All right. So without any further ado, let's get into chapter 11 and find out what's next for Jared and Bailey. Chapter 11. For the first hour and a half of their flight back to San Francisco, Jared tore through the wrap-up from their presentation with quick efficiency. He fired a list of to-dos at Bailey, marked items for follow-up, and outlined his vision for how he saw their marketing evolving. He wanted to expand her ideas to other partners, make them a cornerstone of their strategy. And although she loved the idea, she was too tired, too emotionally exhausted, and too wary of him to really take any of it in. She thought, were they ever going to have that talk, or was he just planning on forgetting they had ever happened? Her stomach rolled. Had she turned him off that badly? Jared repeated something in that relentless, authoritative tone that was getting on her nerves. What? He gave her a long look. Need a break? She threw her notebook on the table in answer, stood and crossed to the tiny window to stare out at the inky darkness. The snap of his laptop closing cut across the silence. Consider our business concluded for the evening, then. Some edge to his voice, made her turn around. He was watching her with that strange, contemplative look he'd been giving her all day since they'd walked out of the Maison building, their presentations behind them. He pressed a button on the console and asked the attendant to serve the champagne. She lifted a brow. We haven't won yet. You need to be a more positive thinker. Her chest tightened, lifting her shoulders. Alexander could still follow through on his threats, Jared. Choose Gehrig. He won't. He wants Project X. And if he continues to play games for the sake of it? He lifted a shoulder. Then I'll reinvent myself. Frankly, I'm very much in the mood, he said. He was in some kind of mood, that was for sure. Another side of him she couldn't read. Betty, a young, attractive, 20-something brunette with an eye for Jared, bustled in with the champagne and poured it into 2 flutes. Get some rest, Jared told her. We won't be needing you anymore. The brunette put the champagne bottle in the ice bucket, flashed Bailey an I am so jealous look, and disappeared. Jared picked up the glasses and crossed over to hand one to her. Warmth seeped into her cheeks as his fingers brushed hers. You know what she was thinking. His blue eyes glittered with intent. Then she'd be right, wouldn't she? I don't intend to spend the next 13 hours studying our stock price. Her pulse sped into overdrive. We haven't even talked yet. So let's talk. He lifted his glass and tipped it at her. You were magnificent in that room today, Bailey. Absolutely brilliant. You have earned my trust, earned my respect. You can stand by my side anytime, and I would be lucky to have you there. Oh. She rocked back on her heels. His gaze remained on her, purposeful, intent. You had the room in the palm of your hand, including me. Her stomach contracted. I don't know about that. She rested her glass against her chin. The garbage trucks woke me up this morning. And there I was, standing at the window watching them, and I knew you were right. If I don't deal with my garbage, with my past, and accept that it's a part of me, I will never truly move forward. She looked up at the man who had never doubted her, not even once, when so many people in her life had. I wanted to win this for you. That's all I knew. He captured her free hand in his and tugged her forward. I didn't walk away from you last night because I didn't want you, Bailey. I walked away because I wanted that woman, the woman who blew my mind in that boardroom today. She pulled her bottom lip between her teeth. I'm still figuring out who she is. I know, he said softly. Every time I watch you struggle and triumph, it touches something inside of me. I can no more remain immune to you than I can stop the sun from rising in the morning. And that terrifies me. Her heart slammed against her chest, loud and insistent. Last night, he admitted, tracing his thumb over her cheek, the thought of Alexander getting anywhere near you made me crazy. I had to tell him he would never have you because I want you. I don't want anyone else to have you. But I've never been that man, Bailey. The man who sticks. I don't even know if I'm capable of it. She pulled in a breath, but the air in the tiny plane suddenly seemed non-existent. The joy exploding inside her that she hadn't ruined everything was almost overwhelming. Maybe we both need to try, she managed to get out. Try to move beyond our pasts. His mouth twisted. We're quite a pair, no? He hooked his fingers in the waistband of her skirt and pulled her flush against him. Her lashes drifted down as heat ignited inside of her. We made a good one, though. He nodded, his gaze resting on hers. You said you'd settle for a man who respects you, a man who tells the truth, a man who wants you for who you are. I cannot, will not make promises I'm not sure I can keep, but I can promise you those things, Bailey, and I'm willing to try with the rest. Emotion clogged her throat, so big, so huge, she felt as if she might choke on it. She didn't need his promises. It had never been about that with them. It had been about trust, and for the first time in her life, she trusted a man explicitly, without reservation. Last night might not have been the last time you need to pick me up, she murmured, offering him an out. I am definitely a work in progress. He brought his mouth down to brush against hers. Consider me on board, he said. He kissed her then, a long, lingering promise of a kiss that lit her from the inside out. Her arms crept around his neck. He ditched their glasses, swung her up in his arms, and carried her into the bedroom at the back of the plane. It was tiny, dominated by a king-sized bed and a chest of drawers, and when he set her down on the soft carpet and sat on the bed, her pulse rate skyrocketed. Last night, he murmured, leaning back on his palms, I didn't want sex between us to be about anger. I didn't want you lowering yourself to that. But tonight, he amended huskily, his gaze on hers. Feel free to demonstrate. She stared at him. Jared, he shook his head. I don't want that memory between us. The thought of you doing this for me is a massive turn-on, Bailey, for no other reason than you are you, and you do that to me. Not because you did it for hundreds of other men who couldn't have you, and I can. The heat in his gaze got her. The deep, powerful throb of the jet beneath her feet mirrored the one pulsing between them. Her head went there, and then her body followed. She wanted to do this for him. She wanted to wipe away the memory of last night. She bent her leg and tugged a shoe off. He held up his hands, eyes glittering. No missiles, please. She tossed the shoe on the floor, reached for the second. Then she moved forward to stand in front of him. His electric blue eyes darkened into deep metallic as she reached for the top button of her blouse. "There are rules," she murmured. "No kissing and no touching." His gaze narrowed. "I think I've changed my mind." "No, you haven't." She took her time, working her way down the buttons, watched him as she stripped off the shirt and dropped it to the floor. His gaze fell to her breasts, encased in cream-colored lace, her nipples already hard and pressing insistently against the confining material. He swallowed hard. "Still want to change your mind?" she said. "No," he rasped. "I'm good." She straddled him, waited for the detached feeling that always came with this. But his eyes wouldn't let her. They held hers firm and forced her to connect. With Jared, there was only the truth. There only ever had been. His heavy-lidded stare dropped to her erect, pink-tipped nipples. "I'm not so sure why they call this a lap dance. Feels more like torture to me." "Yes," she agreed. "It could be described that way. Except," she murmured, rotating her hips in a seductive circle against him, "if you're a very good boy, you might get more." He muttered something under his breath she thought she deciphered as, "I sure hope so," and closed his eyes. He was hard beneath her, thick and long under his suit pants, and this time it was she who swallowed. She remembered how he had filled her, remembered how her muscles had clenched around him, and how powerful her release had been. Lord! She kept up her sinuous rotations. His thighs tensed beneath her, his hands fisting at his sides. "This better be special treatment, Bailey, because if you did this for another man, I might have to kill him. Kill them all." She leaned down and gave him a kiss. "Easy, Tiger." "It is." He slid his hands over her hips. She removed them. "No hands." "But you just kissed me." "That's because I'm in charge." Ruddy color dusted his cheekbones. "Go ahead. Convince yourself of that," he said. "No hands," she repeated, swaying closer. "Lips, however, are allowed." He dipped his head and took her engorged nipple in his mouth. The hot warmth of his lips around her sent a bolt of heat to her core. She arched her back on a low moan and gave herself to him, wholly, sinfully, rocking against him. He transferred his attention to the other hard peak and took her higher. She felt herself unraveling under his touch, losing the control she'd once so desperately craved. But this was Jared, and she was mad about him. "God damn it, Bailey!" He lifted his head, eyes glittering. "I'm waving the white flag, whatever you need." She stood up and slid her skirt off. Her panties. His gaze tracked her every movement, hot, hungry. She came back to him, moved her fingers to the button of his trousers, and slid it out of the material. Then she eased his zipper down. "Please," he was begging now. "Hands are good. I do good things with them." She freed him from his boxers, lowered herself to brush against the hard, hot length of him. "No hands," she said. She was slick and fully aroused, but he was a lot to handle. It took all her concentration to take him inside her, ease herself down on the potent length of him. She hadn't taken half of him when a low groan escaped her lips. "Jared." "Oh, yes, you can," he rasped, reading the look, "but you need to let me use my hands." She nodded, closed her eyes as his palms took the weight of her hips and held her over him, sliding farther inside her. He held her there while her body adjusted to his superior strength sending a surge of lust through her. "More!" she groaned. He gave it to her, slowly, inch by inch, whispering in her ear how much he wanted her, how good she felt. His sexy voice excited her, inflamed her, softening her body until she took him all. It was all she could do to breathe with him buried inside her. but his hands supported her hips, controlling the rhythm, easing her into it. The feeling of intense fullness morphed into a slow, hot burn every time he took her. The angle, the spot he was reaching deep inside her, promised extreme pleasure. Higher and higher he led her until it wasn't enough anymore, until she wanted to scream. She buried her hands in his hair and pleaded in a husky tone that she didn't recognize as her own. He slid his hand between them and pressed his thumb against the throbbing center of her. She looked down, watched him, the erotic sight of the rough passes of his thumb over her throbbing center, summoning a wild, shattering release within seconds, her love for him escaping her lips as the white-hot intensity tore her apart. He heard her, she knew, from the way he froze beneath her. Then the tight convulsions of her body around him pushed him over the edge, an animalistic groan tearing itself from his throat. And then there was no room for thought, only pleasure. The fact that he didn't repeat her words as he settled her against his chest and put his lips to her hair, his breathing hard and uneven, didn't completely throw her. This was Jared, after all, who'd just taken a huge step in telling her how he felt. She was going to focus on that and nothing else, not on the very real possibility that he would never get there. She woke by the light of the moon, by herself in the bed. A glance at the clock told her it was almost 11, another couple of hours before they would land. She sat up, looking for water, figuring Jared had left her to work. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw him sitting in a chair by the windows, dressed only in jeans. He looked lost, distant in his own world. Couldn't sleep? He lifted his head, blinked. No. He didn't invite her over, but she went anyway, settling her hand on his shoulder. His stiffness beneath her fingers made her hand still. The utter remoteness on his face made her consider retreating, until he reached up and pulled her down on his lap. Her heart squeezed at the near rejection. He was such a complex, multifaceted man. She was sure she only knew pieces of him. She stayed there, curled against his chest, until the restlessness emanating from him made her draw back. She traced the hard line of his jaw, the unyielding curve of his mouth, the jagged white scar that bisected his upper lip. How did you get this? He frowned, as if he had to pull the memory from the deep recesses of his mind. The son of one of our friends my father embezzled the money from went to Stanford with me. After my father was sent to jail, he confronted me in one of the campus bars. He was angry, said some things about my father I couldn't let pass, and we got into a fight. His mouth twisted. I thought it was a fist fight, but when Taylor started to lose, he added a beer bottle to the mix. She shivered as she looked at the vicious-looking, inch-long scar. He could have done much worse. His shoulder lifted. He was hurting. His family was ruined. I got it. She ran her fingers across the heavy, dark stubble on his cheek. You were too. Couldn't he see that you weren't to blame for your father's actions? When you're angry and sad, you lash out, he said. Yes, she thought, but it hadn't been his burden to carry. Her heart squeezed. How hard must it have been for a college-aged boy to have to defend his hero? He pulled her tight against his chest, his hand smoothing her hair. My father wants to see me. That call you heard yesterday morning was my PI saying he'd done his usual check on him, that he didn't look great, and he wants to see me. The call that had come right before he'd gone ice cold on her. It made sense now. Do you know why? No, he said. Are you going to go? I don't know. When he got out of jail, he told me he needed time to get his head together, to figure out what he wanted to do. My mom had already remarried, and many of his friends wanted nothing to do with him. I was it really for him, but he didn't even want to see me. He disappeared, showed up in the islands. I told myself distancing myself from him was the best thing for me. I was hurting so badly, I needed space. But we never really reconnected after that, except over legalities. Every time I tried, he pushed me away. I'm sure he felt a lot of shame, she said. His fingers traced the curve of her ear. I think I was afraid to face what had become of him. He was such a strong, proud man. Afterwards, it was like seeing a ghost of him. Her heart contracted in another long pull. She took his hand in hers and laced her fingers through his. That could never happen to you. You are self-possessed in a way I have rarely seen, Jared. You know who you are. His fingers tensed beneath hers, as if he might pull them away, and then he let out a breath and curled them tightly around hers. I should have gone to see him. I should have insisted on it instead of just having him watched over. He's my father, for God's sake. He's not well, and I've let him become a virtual hermit. She shook her head. You were hardly more than a boy when he left. You were sad and angry because he was supposed to take care of you. It doesn't excuse my behavior. It's never too late to make it right, Jared. There was a long pause. Her fingers tightened around his. Go, Jared. Talk to him. You won't forgive yourself if you don't. He was silent then. She curled into his chest and tried to absorb his tension. But this part of Jared, this haunted part, was one only he could deliver himself from, forgive himself for. She felt it rise up between them like a physical presence as the minutes wore on, creating a distance she couldn't bridge. She got the message, dressed, and went back into the cabin, then sat watching the night as it sped by. Did people ever truly slay their demons? Or was it just easier to accept them as part of you? She had always done that. But Jared had convinced her to try harder. Now, if he could only do that for himself. And that is the end of Chapter 11. Join me again soon for Chapter 12. Take care, everybody, and goodbye for now.